it blew out 2 of our elevators. So we're waiting for parts. Some of them may take up to 30 or 60 days to be able to even get the parts to replace. So please direct people. I felt terrible on Sunday morning. I walked out of a Sunday school class, and there in the hallway was someone in a wheelchair trying to use the elevator. And she had to go all the way back to the activity center narthex. So please be looking out for people on Sunday who might be struggling, as our 2 elevators, the front 2, one next to the chapel and one that goes up to the balcony in the sanctuary, are out of order. Nehemiah 3 is interesting. Maybe. There we go. Like I said, I'm not sure whether I really do this or he does this, but Nehemiah 3 feels like an addition to the text. Nehemiah seems to be telling his story, and it's a first-person story that he's telling about all of his work on the wall, and then it's like, and something totally different starts to happen. It's a story told sort of in third person, and it begins with the work of the high priest. And there was a real sense that the high priest didn't often do a lot of good construction work. It's kind of like me, not one of my gifts. Then the high priest Eliashib set to work with his fellow priests and rebuilt the sheep gate. What do you think the sheep gate was used for? Yeah, animals, but specifically why the sheep gate? Slaughtered, sacrifice. Yes, they came through the sheep gate. And they consecrated. This is the only section of the wall that is consecrated, set apart, made holy, and it's done by the priest. And it's the only section of the wall that has that happen before the rest of the wall is completed. They consecrated and set up doors, and they consecrated as far as the Tower of 100 and as far as the Tower of Hananel. And the men of Jericho built next to him, and next to them Zachar, son of Imri, built. The sons of Hassenaah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and set up its doors, its bolts, and its bars. But then you get later in Nehemiah where they say, I set up none of the bolts and bars and any of the gates. So there's a real struggle scholars have with the whole 3rd chapter of Nehemiah. It feels really out of place. It feels misplaced. It feels just sort of thrown in here. It sort of reminds me of the group that we have here that used to do a lot of work around the church, the Hall of Famers. Was anybody in the Hall of Famers? All right, Jerry, the Hall of Famers was a group that did maintenance tasks around here, and they would meet and they would have breakfast, and then they would go around and kind of have their own punch list to help things out around the church. And it was a great way to either be trustees or to help trustees here around the church. So Nehemiah 3 is just thing after thing after thing after thing that they've done, and they sort of name the person, and then this is what they've done. They name the person, and then this is what they've done. Eliashib is the grandson who was married to the relative of Sanballat the Horonite. Anybody know much about Sanballat the Horonite? Okay, we'll get more on him later, but it's funny that the high priest's grandson was married to really the person that is leading the attacks on Nehemiah. This is a great picture. I'm thankful to Scott Heath. I hadn't thought about going this direction, but he taught on Nehemiah on Friday morning, and he put together some great pictures that kind of gave you the lay of the land. So here's one rendition of perhaps what the wall that he was trying to rebuild looked like. We hear over and over again in Nehemiah that the wall is in ruin, and that there's so much rubbish in some translations, or so much rubble that they can't even get back to the rebuilding because they're dealing with so much trash, rubble in their lives. Francis, I don't know, but if you heard, we're building a wall here. We're building a wall of diapers, wipes, and pull-ups. And many of those will be donated to y'all to be able to give away to people who need them. Our bishop has said she scanned the landscape and she's seen that a lot of young families are struggling, and she wondered if churches would get together and buy diapers, wipes, and pull-ups. And so since I'm preaching on Nehemiah, I thought we should rebuild a wall. So I'm hoping that by the time that we're done 4 weeks from now, we have a real wall here that'll be big enough for you to stand behind. And we'll get a picture where we can't see you. So that would be a wonderful thing. But you get a sense that this is the city. And David, this is the Mount of Olives.
No, that's
on this side. On this
it is on that side.
It's on this side. Okay, so further up the hill. So we got the Kidron Valley here. You're kind of coming up, and you would come down the hill and be able to approach the temple on that side. And the city does later expand beyond this. The city goes out this way. The city goes out this way. And so the city does later expand. But here you have the an idea of what the city of Jerusalem might look like. And
go back to the picture.
Okay.
One of the interesting things that is here is that as the city grows and develops, at the time of Jesus, it's expanded beyond that. But the Kidron Valley is known as the Valley of Blood because of all the sacrifices that were done during Passover at the temple. They say somewhere in the estimate around 30,000 animals would be sacrificed during the time of Passover, during that week time. And all the blood, this is a downhill slope from there. So all the blood would run off and run into the Kidron Valley. So can you imagine living at the very tail end of this wall, even at the time of Jesus, if all the blood is running down the hill and into that valley? Great place to live.
So one of the things that David was saying to those folks online is that the Kidron Valley was also known as a valley of blood, where the blood of the sacrifices ran down into the valley. And you could see the topography helps understand how the city is built. So you can see where the valley goes around. The Muslim quarter is up here now. Here's the Western Wall and the Temple Mount. The Jewish quarter is out here now. The Kidron Valley that he was talking about as well, the Gihon Spring right there. But this area helps make sense of that picture with the, so you get the sense of how they built with the topography, which made total sense. And then these are some of the things that are mentioned. And basically in the first chapter of Nehemiah, he takes a midnight ride. He takes a ride around the city to kind of get a sense of what needs to be rebuilt. And as he goes around the city trying to figure out what needs to be rebuilt, then he comes back, and in chapter 3, they just start rebuilding. They start at the Sheep Gate, the Tower of 100, the Tower of Haniel, the Fish Gate, and they kind of make their way around. There's a better picture of everything there with all the different gates. You see the Kidron Brook down there. The Tower of Ovens is only mentioned here in Nehemiah. This is one idea about where the angle was. You have the Fountain Gate. There's a Dung Gate that's mentioned. I'll share another picture of that. There's a broad wall, and people think that wall was reinforced a second time. So that's why perhaps it became a broad wall. But the Sheep Gate was the first gate to be restored. It was rebuilt by the high priest, and it was the only gate set apart to be consecrated. And we talked about that earlier because of sacrifice. It was used to bring sacrifices in for the temple. And then this thing continues just to go on. Anybody want to try and pronounce all these names? Okay, and it's just this litany of names and what they did. They repaired the old gate. And then other people who were under the jurisdiction, the governor beyond the river, did this. And then they worked on the Tower of Ovens. And next to him, Shallum, son of Halohesh, ruler of half the district of Jerusalem, made repairs, he and his daughters. Now, this is the only mention that somebody has brought their daughters in, but some scholars believe that his daughters were not literal daughters. His daughters, they said that the little, neighborhoods were referred to as daughters. So if you were the governor of an area, you had cities or neighborhoods that were under your care, and those were called as daughters. So it may be his own daughters are helping rebuild the wall, but it also may be that the smaller villages, neighborhoods under his care, as he was ruler of half of Jerusalem, city councilman, if you will, for half of Jerusalem, that it could have just been the people in his neighborhoods and not literal daughters. So we continue to hear about different things all around the wall. Now Hanam and the inhabitants of Zanoah repaired the valley gate. You see the valley gate down here. They repaired the valley gate. They built it up and set up its doors, its bolts, its bars, repaired 1,000 cubits of the wall as far as the dung gate. Someone else also repaired the dung gate. He rebuilt it and set up its doors, its bolts, and its bars. But later on, like in chapter 6, you'll see Nehemiah said, I didn't set any of the doors. And strangely, as Nehemiah talks, especially in chapter 6, he talks about, I did this, I did this, I did this. And we'll talk about that in a couple weeks on a Sunday morning. But it's strange. It's not we did this or we all did this. He talks in the first person, like I did all this work. And that's just one more. The valley gate is there. And this is the dung gate today. You can actually go in and out of the dung gate. Here's the Damascus gate up here, the Temple Mount, and part of the the expansion beyond this original area. They had the Jewish quarter, the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, and the Armenian quarter, and these various gates, some that are open and some that are no longer open, some that you cannot go through. They're waiting for a time when that gate will be open, when the Messiah comes. We keep going with Nehemiah 3. I mean, it's just this whole litany of different people who did different repairs. The ruler of Mitzpah repairs the fountain gate. He rebuilt it, covered it up, set its doors and bolts and bars. And this is just over and over and over again. All of chapter 3 is this list. It's like the genealogies in Matthew or in other places. You get this just long list of everyone who was there to help and all the different things that they did to rebuild the walls. It keeps going. It keeps going. I mean, that's just all chapter 3 is. Who did what and what did they do? And the word repairs occurs 34 times. They repaired, they repaired, they repaired. As if you didn't get the message. This was not a building project. This was repairs. I think there are only 2 times where somebody builds something. Everything else has been repaired. Things were in shambles and they needed to be repaired. And it just keeps going. The house gate, and finally opposite the muster gate and to the upper room of the corner, and between the upper room of the corner and the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and the merchants made repairs. Everybody did these repairs. And now we move to Nehemiah chapter 4. I'm not preaching on the list in chapter 3, if that's okay. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time Sunday morning on the long list of people who've done repairs in chapter 3. It would be like me just listing all of our trustees and all the projects that we've had to fix this year. And that would be scintillating, I'm sure, as it has been just the last few minutes. But Nehemiah chapter 4 begins with ridicule. Now, Sanballat, the Horonite, remember him from earlier? He's kind of the governor of Samaria. He's the leader of Samaria. And Sanballat heard they were building the wall. And you remember who the Samaritans were? They were the people who didn't leave. They were faithful Jews who stayed and intermarried with the people who'd come in and taken over. And they were holding on to their version of Judaism. And the people who'd been exiled had a different version of Judaism that they held on to in exile. And when they came back home, those two ideas of what Judaism was were in conflict. So Sanballat, the Samaritan, the Horonite, heard that they were rebuilding the wall, and he was angry, greatly enraged, and he mocked the Jews. He couldn't believe that they were rebuilding the wall. And he said in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing?" We're the strong remnant here. These are the feeble Jews that have come back and are trying to do this. And he's trying to undermine their sense of self. He's trying to undermine their sense of confidence. What are these feeble Jews doing? And then he kind of asks 5 questions. Will they restore it by themselves? Will they offer sacrifice? Will they finish it in a day? Will they revive the stones that are heaps of rubbish, burned out ones at that? And these rhetorical questions are meant to kind of rally his troops and to undermine the confidence of Nehemiah. Sorry, so what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it by themselves? Will they offer sacrifice? Will they finish it in a day? Will they revive the stones out of heaps of rubbish? And then his buddy Tobiah gets on the horn as well. And he's like, and he said, that stone wall they're building, any fox going up it could break it down. Even if they rebuild it, it's not going to be very good. It's just going to fall down. Just a little fox going up it would topple the wall as well. So Sanballat was the Horonite. Tobiah was an Ammonite, and he is from the area of Ammon, and Ammon today is Jordan. Okay, you get the same name, Ammonite, Ammon. So here you get a sense. Sanballat the Horonite up there with Samaria. You've got Tobiah the Ammonite over here in the Jordan area, and then we'll hear about Geshem the Arab as well. And they just continue to kind of surround the people of Jerusalem with all the people who are against this rebuilding project. I don't know if I said it last week or maybe Charlotte said it last week, but Jerusalem was just like a little gnat here in the whole kingdom of Persia. Persia is this huge kingdom, and Jerusalem is just a little place that isn't even, in the middle of the main road here. I mean, Jerusalem is in the hill country, and why would it be so significant? Why would it be some place that God would be at work? So after he is ridiculed, it's hard to even see it in the text, but he's ridiculed. And then there's once again another quick transition, and it goes to prayer. And this is his prayer. Let's pray it together. Hear, O God, for we are despised. Turn their taunt back on their own heads and give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover their guilt, and do not let their sin be blotted out from your sight, for they have raged against the builders. You ever wanted to pray a prayer like that? It doesn't kind of meet our New Testament standards of what prayer ought to be. But if you look through the Psalms, you'll find prayers like this. There's a word for it. I learned a new word this week. They are prayers of, let's see if I can get this word. Maybe you know it, Brandon. What's the name of this prayer? They're prayers of imprecation. 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 Anybody? They're kind of a curse on people, is what the idea is. Imprecation. And instead of a prayer that is like, oh God, save me, it's kind of got two edges. Oh God, save me and get my enemies. And this is really the sense of this prayer here in Nehemiah. So Nehemiah is being ridiculed, and so he's like, God, this is your project. I'm going to turn those people over to you. I'm not going to do anything about them. I'm not going to attack back. I'm going to put them in your hands, God, and you'll fix them, won't you? You will take care of these people. I know that you will, because this is your building project and not my building project. But there's no sense that, and then Nehemiah offered this prayer. There's just this ridicule, and then it's as though we transition without even knowing it. So we rebuilt the wall, and all the wall was joined together, half its height, for the people had a mind to work. And this is sort of like halfway through the story and halfway through the rebuilding. And I don't know about you, but sometimes halfway through a project is when it can get really discouraging. You feel like, oh, we've been working on this thing for so long. Are we ever going to get to the end? And when you're halfway, you can still go back to the other direction. But when you've gone past the halfway point, you need to keep going. So we rebuilt the wall, and all the wall was joined together, half its height, for the people had a mind to work. I love that line. The people had a mind to work. They were hardworking people, and they all bless you. That's okay. Sorry about that. They had a mind to work. But when Sanballat and Tobiah, and now we got the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites, heard they were repairing the wall of Jerusalem was going forward and the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. So they've gone from being angry and enraged. And it's as though everyone is joining in to try and undermine all the enemies. They're completely surrounded by enemies. They're very angry, and then it's gone beyond mere words. They go beyond mere words, and they plot to come together and fight against Jerusalem and cause confusion to it. That kind of was an echo for me of the Tower of Babel, that let us go down and cause confusion with their languages. They wanted to cause confusion, and that's a great way to undermine a building project, is to cause confusion in it, right, Brian? If there's confusion, it's hard to get things done. So we prayed to our God, and several times you'll see that. You might underline it as you do your own study. I think it's 3 different times here in Nehemiah 4. So we prayed to our God. And there's a real sense of us and them. What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it by themselves? Will they offer sacrifice? Will they finish it in a day? What Sanballat is trying to set up is a real us and them. And I'm not sure that Nehemiah makes it any better, because he starts talking about what our God is doing. So we prayed to our God, and this time we set a guard as protection against them day and night. The first time in response to ridicule, he prays, but when they're going to attack, he prays and sets a guard. And I think that's a very helpful thing. What is the old line? Pray as if your life depended on God, and work as if it all depended on you. And that's really sort of Nehemiah's idea right here, working as if it all depended on him. So they prayed and set a guard, worked with all their heart, is how it says in the NIV. They had a mind to work. They worked with all their heart. And here's the sense. You got Jerusalem in the middle, and what they're trying to show you is that everyone all around is against this building project and just isn't sure what this building project is going to mean. The Ammonites, the Arabs, the Ashdodites, the Sumerians, all of them are against any sort of rebuilding here in Jerusalem. But Judah said, the strength of the burden bearers is failing. There is too much rubbish. It's also rubble. I think it's probably a better translation. There's too much rubble so that we're unable to work on the wall. And our enemy said, they'll not know or see anything before we come upon them and kill them and stop the work. When the Jews who lived near them came, they said to us 10 times. So these are people who don't live in Jerusalem. These are faithful Jews that have moved out and are in different places. And they come back and they give a report. We're hearing these rumors. And when the Jews who lived near the enemies came near, they said to us 10 times, from all the places where they live, they will come up against us. And over again, they got warning after warning after warning that someone was going to come and undermine them. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in open places, I stationed the people according to their families, with their swords and their spears and their bows. So he sort of organizes them according to their family, people that they know, people that they are most comfortable with, and he puts them together in families to try and be ready for any attack. And over and over again, the warning comes. Wherever you turn, they will attack us, is how it says in the NIV. From all the places where they live, they will come up against us. They were warned, and they were warned, and they were warned that an attack is coming. So then Nehemiah says, after I looked these things over, I stood up and I said to the nobles and officials and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Do not be afraid. We've heard that over and over again in the biblical record. Do not be afraid of them. Remember that the Lord who is great and awesome, and remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your kin, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your households. So his 3 instructions in the midst of all this turmoil is do not be afraid, remember the Lord, and fight for your kin, fight for your household. And then it goes from ridicule to the ridiculous. When our enemies heard that their plot was known to us and that God had frustrated it, now there's this whole sense in Nehemiah that this is not something that Nehemiah is doing. This is something that God is doing to protect them. Heard their plot was known to us and that God had frustrated, we all returned to the wall, each to his own work. From that day on, half the servants worked on construction, and half of them held the spears, shields, bows, and body armor, and the leaders posted themselves behind the whole house of Judah. So their productivity is cut in half, right? I mean, their productivity is cut in half because half of them are holding swords and spears and trying to defend them, and the other half is working. So you would think it would slow down the work. And then this is the ridiculous part for me. And I hope you can get a picture of this in your mind. The burden bearers carried their load in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and with other held a weapon. So imagine trying to get anything done with a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. I mean, this is just a ridiculous scene for me, is that they're under attack. Excuse me. They're under attack. And at first, they've split the jobs up half and half. Half the people are defending, half the people are building. And now the people are divided. The people are trying to defend and build at the same time. And how does that work for people? When you spend all your time being defensive, it's hard to build anything up. When you spend all your time dealing with attacks, it's hard to spend time building up. It's exhausting. And so you're kind of pulled in two directions. So this is sort of my key line for this whole text. The burden bearers carried their load in such a way that they labored with one hand and held a weapon with the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped to his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me, and I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread out, and we are separated far from another on the wall. Rally to us whenever you hear the trumpet. Our God will fight for us. It's not our fight, it's God's fight. And that's one of the reasons I'm able to offer sort of a prayer that is not the kindest prayer. I'm saying, God, I'm going to trust you to take care of these people and give them their comeuppance. What happens when our attention is divided? What happens when we're trying to fight and also try and build? One of those does not get our full work. One of those does not get our full attention. So we labored at the work, and half of them held the spears from the break of dawn until the stars came out. I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night inside Jerusalem, so that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. So this is what I'd like to propose for the next 52 days, this next line. So neither I nor my brothers nor my servants nor the men of the guard who followed me ever took off their clothes. So can we do that? Can we covenant to do that? Each kept his weapon in his right hand. There's a ridiculousness to this, but you could see how desperate they were to do and finish the work. So as we think through this section of Nehemiah, think of a time that you've ever felt like giving up, maybe on a project or on someone. What made you stick with that project or with them? Why do people try to stop others' efforts at rebuilding or getting healthy? We often see this when someone is in your family or in your sphere of influence is trying to do something new. You're trying to stop drinking, and the people around you who you always drink with are not encouraging. They don't help you to become more healthy. And why is it that people will undermine your attempts at rebuilding or getting healthy? And where do you need to do some rebuilding? I asked that on Sunday. And then I'd love for you to share around the table. What is one thing you are starting or one thing you can do for the next 50 days, and who will hold you accountable? I have a couple things that I wanted to share this morning. I have started with this little book, and I'm writing down everything that I eat. I'm keeping track of what I'm doing to strengthen my heart. I'm starting every morning with the prayer, if it pleases the King, which is from Nehemiah, the 2nd chapter, verses 5 and 7. I'm working on heart things, on heart health, to connect with Elizabeth and people I love every day in a more intentional manner without a phone anywhere in the vicinity. To my soul, we've put together a joint prayer list, and we have this stack of cards from people like you, and we're lifting them up and praying for those people. 20 minutes of uninterrupted reading, which I did more of at 3 o'clock this morning, so I'm ahead for the day. Thank you, Bill, for the book. 30 minutes a day of exercise. And so I was trying to think, if I'm going to start exercising, I need to practice that on Saturday before I even tell people on Sunday I'm going to do it. And I got to the gym over at Dunwoody Baptist. And when I got to the gym, Bob Arndt, anybody know Bob in the church? Okay. So I saw Bob, and he looked at me. He's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, I haven't seen you here before. You're not a regular here at our gym. And I said, I'm trying to get back to it. You know, I used to do Orange Theory every day, but with the pandemic, I quit doing that. I didn't want to go back to the gym and get sick. So I'm finally back at the gym. And he said, well, if you're going to come back here, I'll train you. And I was like, okay, thank you. Here's your sign. He said, he said, I'm not a professional, but if you just need me to hold you accountable, I will. And he started me on the impact body plan. And so I got started on that yesterday, and I'm so sore, but it's a good sore. I texted them this morning, but they're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 15 workouts you have to do every morning just to get limber. This is just to get limber. That's not before we do strength training and everything else. But what a gift that God gave me on Saturday. So he met with me yesterday. He's going to meet with me tomorrow, and he's going to meet with me 3 days a week for the next 52 days, if not longer than that. And he was so patient with me yesterday. And that is a wonderful thing when you're just starting out and trying to make a change. So 30 days of exercise. And then I'm going to write down everything I eat. I'm not starting a diet. I haven't, I'm not counting calories. I'm just trying to be more mindful of my eating. So I've got that, and I'm writing everything down for 52 days. And then I shared with people on Sunday, The Quiet House. Did anybody see this book Sunday? It's called The Quiet House, Reflections on the Loss of a Spouse. We gave 5 away on Sunday, and a number of people have asked me for this. It's written by my favorite pastoral counselor, a fellow named Ron Greer. He'll be here to speak at the end of October. And if you know anyone who could benefit from a book like this, we've got a few copies, but it's easy to order on Amazon as well. It might be a gift for someone that you know or someone that you love. The Quiet House, Reflections on the Loss of a Spouse. So that's just another resource. And I already told you about Living to Lead, and we've got a couple copies of these still to pick up on the way out. So I hope you will do that. Those are some resources. And then finally, what have you learned from Nehemiah so far? One of our members here told me he got an F in Nehemiah. He didn't know anything about Nehemiah, but hopefully he knows a little bit more about Nehemiah now, and we'll continue to delve into Nehemiah for the next 4 Sundays in the next several weeks in here. Yes. Yep.
Is there no protection from these people from the groups that are trying to support their efforts?
Well, it's interesting because as you look at Nehemiah, the first couple chapters, he is sent with kind of a guard that goes with him. That guard is not mentioned as much later on, but I have to assume that they're still there. But the numbers are against him as well. And then we'll see next week that, there's a sense of them trying to undermine him. And so they ridicule him first to try and undermine him, and that doesn't work. So then they threaten him, and that doesn't work. And then they start rumors. And, isn't that really the kind of insidious way that people progress? They start rumors that he's rebuilding the wall so that he can rebel against the king. And so they try to sow dissent and uncertainty when their other tactics don't work. So even if there are people there from the guard, we're 1,000 miles away. How many people would he have sent to go do this to this little backwater province? He's got a detail that's with him that helped him get safe passage to here. But how many did they go back home after he was there to redo the wall? We don't have a sense of the numbers of people who are there. And what they try to do is to try and say, well, he's not here for King Artaxerxes anyway. He's starting a rebellion. Other questions about Nehemiah? How many of y'all knew a lot about Nehemiah before? A little bit. But I think, some of the lessons are still worth hearing today. So I hope that you will talk amongst yourselves and learn a little bit more about yourselves and about Nehemiah as we talk about rebuilding. Discuss among yourselves.